Hello everyone, Jim Clare here. My very first YouTube video. It's pretty exciting. I've been talking about this for a long time over on my site, jimclare.com. And if you want to subscribe here, I would love it if you did that. It's the very first one, so it'll only get better from here. But today, I have the 3 books to read if you want to understand the Roman Empire. So before I get into that, why 3 books? And it doesn't have to necessarily be 3 books, but to understand a topic or an author, I like to curate books. You can pick 3 books, you can read through 5 books, and when you do this, you get a better understanding of what it is that you're reading. There's a lot of note-taking systems out there that tell you how to extract as much as you can from reading a book. And there's a lot of people who read a book, particularly nonfiction books, who think that they have to remember all of these particular factoids, right? They go on a podcast, or they're listening to a podcast and they hear an expert talking about World War II, and they are amazed at how this expert is recalling all of these dates and facts about World War II. And they wonder, when they read a book, why aren't they remembering all of these particular facts? So then they take a ton of notes or a note-taking system to remember all of these books. What these people forget is that the expert talking about World War II has probably read 30 or 40 books on World War II, or they've read a bunch of books on that particular topic, or they are fresh on that topic, which means they may have read 5 books on that particular topic, and then they go on a podcast and they are able to recall the facts. So those people have read a ton of books on the topic versus just read one book and remembered every single thing. So that's not really how good reading works. And I just wanted to get that out of the way. It's not to say you can read just one book, because I do have one book. If you want to read just one book on the Roman Empire to get a great understanding of it, what made it rise, what made it fall, how it worked, what the culture was like, I'm going to cover that at the end. But I like doing topics. And the same thing goes for fiction authors, but we'll cover that in another video at another time when I do fiction authors. But today I have 3 books to understand the Roman Empire. Why I picked the Roman Empire and why I'm doing this is personal. I've been reading a lot about the Roman Empire probably for about the last, I'd say about 5 or 6 years. I actually read this right here. This is the entire canon of Edward Gibbon's The History of the Decline and the Fall of the Roman Empire. A lot of people online will say read Gibbon as a retort to an argument, and it's clear that no one has really ever read Gibbon. This took me, I think it was about 6 or 7 months to read. It might have been a little bit longer. It was an intellectual marathon, but it was deeply satisfying. However, I wish I had read a few other books before diving into Gibbon. And I say that because of Gibbon's arguments. I wasn't quite sure of his stances. I didn't have much of a background yet on the Roman Empire. My only background probably would be a long reading of the Stoics, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus. I've read them extensively, but that didn't really set me up for the history of the Roman Empire per se. And not to say that Gibbon was terrible to read, it was amazing to read, but just to get a handle of his particular positions and arguments, because he was making positions and arguments, and a lot of them have been debunked. And I mention his positions and arguments because they have become somewhat a mythic argument that is passed down, that people repeat and rehash without understanding, particularly on how the Roman Empire fell. So there's this one popular argument out there that Christians made the Roman Empire fall, that as soon as the Roman Empire turned Christian, suddenly it fell. That argument has long been debunked. That argument comes from Edward Gibbon's snobbery towards Christians. So Edward Gibbon was a man of the Enlightenment. In the Enlightenment, many of the thinkers in the Enlightenment were questioning Christianity and questioning various claims. And Gibbon was snobby towards Christianity, he's just a man of his times. And Gibbon probably overemphasizes the degeneracy that was going on during the Roman Empire. He really leans on Suetonius and Tacitus, who have very salacious accounts of the Roman Empire, particularly Suetonius, which I just read from a pre-launch book club about, 2 or 3 months ago. And it is pornographic book. It's jaded, it's cynical, and it makes some of the details are wild in that book. And Edward Gibbon leans a lot on that. That is due in part to Edward Gibbon not liking outsiders, meaning he doesn't like tragic hero figures. In other words, he doesn't like outsiders to the elite class, right? Gibbon is a man of, he likes the intellectuals, he likes the elite, and he likes the esteemed, right? The so-called sober and judicious that you hear about today, about when people criticize Trump, that he's not sober and judicious. It's this sort of snobbery that they think he's crude or anything like that. So Gibbon took that towards any leader or figure that he felt was an outsider, and he aimed snobbery at them. And that was just Gibbon's worldview. And I didn't understand that when I was going into it. But coming back to this Christian thing, we'll go into it, but that is a long myth. That's a myth that Gibbon kind of put out there, or his position put out there. There was a lot of Romans during the Roman time who were skeptical of the Christians. And so the writing of the time was heavily slanted towards them, and Gibbon really picked up on that. But when you, with evidence that has come out, writings that have come out, the archaeological evidence is what I'm referring to, it kind of puts Gibbon to shame, or it doesn't kind of, it puts that argument to bed, and it's long been debunked. The other argument made by Gibbon is that Rome fell due to degeneracy. That is not quite the Gibbon argument. A lot of people like to put that out there. Gibbon does point out to the civic enervation that occurred during times of decadence during the Roman Empire, and he was absolutely right to put that in there, because that was a feature of the Roman Empire. Did it cause the fall? I'll get into that. But he overemphasized that. So you see a lot of people saying that the Roman Empire fell due to degeneracy. I even saw one take on there on X a couple months ago that the Roman Empire fell because women started wearing bikinis, right? This is a puerile take, and it's just as bad as Roman Empire fell due to it turning Christian. So that ignores so much truth, so much fact of the people who say that. And they tend to only focus on the western half of the Roman Empire, and they don't focus on the east, and they don't focus on why the Roman Empire lasted longer in the east. So, and we're going to get into that. But Edward Gibbon certainly had impact in how we understand the Roman Empire, but not a lot of people have actually read these 3 volumes. It's, I don't know, it was each of these books here. This is the Penguin Classics version, is a couple thousand pages. I think about 1,100 pages for each or so. You can read them. It was a wonderful exercise. I absolutely loved it. But not everyone's going to read Edward Gibbon. It is quite the journey. There is an abridged version. One of my friends, or 2 of my friends, I believe, have read it, and they really liked it. It does take out a lot of the juicy parts from what I gather. Edward Gibbon gets into really juicy elements, especially with, I believe it's Theodora. That is a wild scene. And also the wife of Marcus Aurelius. We'll cover that myth. That's pretty out there, that she was a nymphomaniac. We'll see how true or not true that is here. So anyways, I like reading books in curated topics. So we're going to pick 3 books, and I actually have a kind of a bonus book for you. So 3 books to best understand the Roman Empire if you don't want to read all of Gibbon. And why would you want to understand the Roman Empire? Well, it's been in discourse for a while. That meme has gone around that men are only thinking about the Roman Empire. So I guess men do think about the Roman Empire. So if you back your car into a parking space, or if you're a man and you back your truck into a parking space, probably you've thought about the Roman Empire. So I've picked these 3 books. I mean, I've read a bunch of books since Edward Gibbon on the Roman Empire, some firsthand sources, and some also historical sources. So I haven't read everything on the Roman Empire. I haven't read the works of Tom Holland on the Roman Empire, which are supposed to be fantastic. Yet I did read his Suetonius translation, which is also fantastic. So these are the 3 plus a bonus that I have picked that have made what I have felt that give the best understanding of the Roman Empire, how it came to be, the culture, why it actually fell or how it fell. And it gives you a look at the ebb and flow, the different periods during the Roman Empire. And they're also pretty accessible, and I think pretty memorable how well they are written. And so let's get into it. So the first book to best understand the Roman Empire that I recommend, and this is a little bit of an order I recommend this first go through, is The 10 Caesars by Barry Strauss. So 10 Caesars, Roman Emperors from Augustus to Constantine. I read this, I guess, about 2 months ago. I finished it, and it was a book I was reading when my daughter was born. So Barry Strauss is a classicist historian. He's a Hoover Fellow. He's written a number of books on the Roman Empire, such as Jews versus Rome, The War That Made the Roman Empire, and how Caesar was murdered. He's a fantastic writer. So before I get into it about this book, Barry Strauss, in all of the books I have read, has a rare gift of writing a book of substance and depth, of historical substance and depth, yet making it approachable with how he's telling it. What I mean by that is there's a lot of histories out there, like pop histories, which are great, but they lack substance. They kind of lean on factoids. So something like The History of Salt, which is a very fun book, but it leans on factoids, or a book like Freakonomics, where it kind of gives you a couple of random factoids that sound cool, but in reality, they lack a lot of substance and depth. So they're highly readable. I'm not saying to not read those books. A lot of them are very fun to read, but they're not, they don't take different positions. They're not going to take different counters. They're not going to take certain stakes. They're not going to dissect tough topics. They're going to give you a surface overview, and they're writing it in a particular way that is very general, very factoid, and that is not, again, to take away from them, but they lack a certain substance or depth. Sometimes certain historical works are way too heavy for people to just pick up. And one of the books I have for today is a bit heavy. And some people can feel like it's a slog. So if you're jumping in for the very first time to read it, like say the Roman Empire, you just jump into Gibbon, that's going to be a pretty heavy duty book. And when you get into more serious histories, what a lot of people don't realize that there are particular viewpoints to tell histories, right? There's counterfactual historians, there's revisionist history, there's, you could say, apologetics, there's counter histories, there's economic history, and historians will go through the lens. And Barry Strauss is a classicist, and he tries to deal with firsthand sources. His particular area of expertise is military history, so he really has an understanding of classic military history and how to expand the historical narratives from that, how to understand archaeological evidence from that. And a historian who is dealing with firsthand sources understands how to, or they're learned in how to dissect what is probably maybe gossip of the day, what is exaggerated, what is under-exaggerated, what the cultural tones are of the day. And that goes through the historical lens. A lot of general histories don't get into those particular types of viewpoints. And that's, and Barry Strauss, however, he is able to take that substance and write it in a particular way. You could call it a narrative style of history, but he's far more, it's not just straight narrative, and able to make it accessible and approachable and a lot of fun actually to read it. So it's highly readable. It is full of substance and depth. And 10 Caesars is a fantastic book. It goes through, obviously, like the title says, 10 Caesars. It starts with Augustus, who is the first Caesar who made the Roman Empire in his own image, or he was I guess you could say, the lone dictator or the lone emperor. So it went from a collection sort of warlords into an emperor, and Augustus really shaped how the empire worked. And then it goes all the way to Constantine, which was the most famous emperor who turned to Christianity, and he moved the empire. He was firmly rooted in the East, or he built Constantinople. And he goes through Augustus, Tiberius, Nero, Vespasian, Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius, Septimius Severus, probably butchered that, and Diocletian. What makes this book really great, so he has 10 vignettes on each Caesar, but he writes to what makes what the rise of each Caesar and the cultural forces, the political forces, the economic forces, and the social forces that led to the rise of each Caesar. Each Caesar's particular military and foreign policy worldview, their cultural tastes, what kind of shaped their cultural taste, their disposition towards their constituents, their disposition towards foreign enemies. And through all of these lenses, you get a real great handle of Roman culture, of the elite Roman circles, how their actions, their leadership, their decisions, how it affected the Roman Empire, how it affected, essentially the world at that time, because the Roman Empire was the largest empire in the world. And when you get down to it, when you look at each particular period, how Strauss geniusly shows each period, how it influenced each Caesar, right? Each Caesar was a man of their time in a sense. And then how certain Caesars would react against that, either counter to that. You really get a great handle of everything, like I just said, from culture to economics, right? You really see what like marriage customs were like, how the marriage customs were in a sense very schizophrenic. It wasn't through the Western lens of marriage that we have today. Anyone could be married at any different times. A Caesar could want to marry someone's, a senator's wife for whatever reason. He was attracted to her, or he felt that his station was going to rise. Families would do kind of power broking features with marriage. So you didn't really know what was going to happen. And it wasn't through this modern Western lens of, oh my God, she's coming with 3 or 4 kids, or he's coming with 3 or 4 different kids from a different marriage, right? It was all for station. It's not to say that people weren't in love. I mean, as Strauss shows, I believe it might have been Tiberius, and I might be mistaking this from Suetonius, but Tiberius was in love with someone, but then his mother, I believe, and I might have that wrong, but this was kind of a commonality. The mother would marry them to someone else of higher station, or the father. And the other element that Strauss shows is how a lot of the women in the inner circles of these Caesars were big-time power brokers in the Roman Empire, and they faced enormous amounts of scorn and hate. And that's probably why you get these stories of, most famously, you could say, of Marcus Aurelius's wife. So Marcus Aurelius's wife, Faustina, is considered to be this nymphomaniac, this adulterous affairs. We've heard, I've seen online multiple times that Marcus Aurelius was a cuckold, and then you see red pill people attacking Marcus Aurelius. And that is completely void of, it shoves everything through modern Western lenses. It doesn't understand marriage customs of the time. And Strauss, with Faustina, does a great job of countering the common degeneracy claims that the Roman Empire was this totally degenerate empire. He shows why those accusations, why those salacious rumors occurred. So, as I said, with Tacitus and Suetonius in Gibbon, Suetonius, will focus on Suetonius. Suetonius wrote something akin to what Barry Strauss wrote, the Lives of the Caesars, and he covered 12 Caesars. And he writes these really crazy rumors or crazy tales on Nero, Tiberius. Tiberius had his own sex island that was, I can't even repeat it on YouTube how he writes it. It was just totally bizarre and beyond pornographic. It was totally deranged. And but the reason why Suetonius wrote those rumors are how historians or biographers back then would write if they were commissioned by a Caesar to write biographies of past Caesars or the past Roman lives, many of them did it in such a way to make the current Caesar, the person they're writing for, to stand out like a kind of almost deity or a god, or this symbol of perfection of how good we actually have it. So they would make these past emperors, or these, and their women in their lives and everyone around them, to look awful. And that also had political reasons, right? The past emperor might have had, say, a different foreign policy tact than the current one. So they had to make it look like a complete disaster. So parsing through those old works of what is rumor and what isn't is pretty tough, but Strauss does a great job. And basically, a lot of the degeneracy rumors, some of them are probably have never happened, or if they were happening, it wasn't Nero who was necessarily doing it. It may have been someone else. or there was just totally made up. And there are probably some instances where it was true. And I'll get into the degeneracy in a moment. The other element that Strauss does in this book is he counters a lot of the common myths, basically how Christianity caused the fall of the Roman Empire. Again, that's if you read it, once you read a bunch of good historians of the Roman Empire, you really realize how much that concept is totally bunk. But Strauss shows that the fall of the West, that's always a thing. The Christians lost the West. But since the start of the Roman Empire, since Augustus, all eyes were on the eastern part of the Roman Empire because the culture, the dynamism was in the eastern half of the Roman Empire. Rome at the time was almost you could say, a kind of backwater. There wasn't a lot in what would be today Germany. Rome conquered it, but it wasn't the culture that was going through the east, through the trading routes. The Romans themselves liked a lot of Eastern culture, such as Stoicism, which is very popular during the Roman Empire. That came from the East. So all eyes were constantly on the East, and a lot of emperors early on in the West were always focused on the East. So it was headed that way. As Thomas Sowell says, money kind of attracts where it wants to go. That could be a cynical way of saying it, but the culture was in the East. So that's why when Rome fell, there was so much focus on the East by certain Caesars. When the West fell, it wasn't really that big of a deal to them because they thought all of the action was in the East, right? So he covers that really, really well about how once in the East, the Roman Empire maintained itself for 1,000 years. And arguably during that time, it was a little bit more robust, according to Strauss's depiction. So a fantastic book. All right, to the degeneracy part. Was the Roman Empire degenerate? Was it as degenerate as many people claim? Yes, it was degenerate. Yes, it was licentious, but it ebbed and flowed during particular times. So the proof of the degeneracy, probably the best work we have of it, and probably the most telling work we have of today, is the Satyricon by Petronius. Petronius was Nero's cultural advisor. So Nero was an emperor, I believe from the 60 AD or something like that to about 69 when he was forced to kill himself. Nero is famous for being a tyrant. Random fact on Nero, you can thank Nero for concrete. That was kind of his thing. But Nero was also, to the level of tyrant that is put out there today, Barry Strauss sort of walks it back. He wasn't the greatest, but he did do a lot for the arts. He did have some decent foreign policy ideas, and he wasn't a horrific emperor at the start. He did have many significant flaws, but he was a man of his time. He wasn't the worst. Was he degenerate? Yes, he was, and he became a victim of his own vices. And Petronius was inside his inner circle. Petronius was Nero's cultural advisor. And a cultural advisor at the time is someone who has a finger on the pulse of the culture of the Roman Empire, probably those closest, right? What were the people, what were the lower classes like? What were the upper classes like? What did they like? And Nero was very obsessed and very concerned about the arts because he himself was a singer. He was probably a decent singer. He loved to perform, and he loved the arts, and he wanted a hand on it. And he loved Petronius. And Petronius was also a writer, and he wrote this Satyricon, which is a sense of a play. The Satyricon is unique. It is deeply pornographic. So the translations have been watered down through the centuries. And we only have the middle part of the Satyricon. Christian monks of all people saved the Satyricon. Why did they save it? Because they saw what Petronius was writing, and that is a culture in the grips of excess, a culture in the grips of decadence, indulgence, cynicism, and when it's going to complete excess. And they saw the power of this and the warning of this, of what happens when a culture gets inside of these grips and what is going on into the makeup of people, the psychology of people, how it kind of enervates agency towards preventing, living, as you could say, a virtuous life, how it becomes such a distraction. And the there's famous scenes in here. One of them being Trimalchio's feast, which is a constant theme used in Hollywood. Trimalchio's feast is essentially this massive banquet, an obsession of food, an obsession of rooms in the houses, an obsession with sex. You've seen this in shows like Sopranos, for instance, the Bada Bing, any sort of party at the Bada Bing in the episodes of The Sopranos. That's a nod to Trimalchio's feast. If you watch Crocodile Dundee, if you remember that movie where he goes to the Manhattanite party, there's a lot of themes of Trimalchio's feast. Was it the Wolf of Wall Street, or not Wolf of Wall Street? Sorry, the one with Michael Douglas. Well, whatever, it's on the tip of my tongue, but Wall Street or whatever with Michael Douglas. There's a lot of themes of Trimalchio's feast in there. So Petronius wrote a book satirizing Roman culture during the time of Nero, and it got him killed. It got him executed. The reasons why it got him executed: during Trimalchio's feast, one of the characters, one idea is that Nero believed it was making fun of him, and it was really too much on the nose, and so he had him killed. The other reason was that Nero felt it possibly it painted Roman culture too much on the nose, too much of an honest take, you could say, of what was going on with Roman culture, how decadent it was, and then painted it in a bad light, and so that got him executed. Either way, the work rubbed Nero the wrong way, and Nero killed Petronius, which it had to really have rubbed Nero the wrong way, because he loved Petronius. He was deep in the inside circle of Nero, and he felt the work too much on the nose in some way, shape, or form. So why is Petronius Satyricon an important book to read as far as today? So one, this is the translation by J.P. Sullivan. There are other translations out there, and a lot of them are watered down. You can probably understand why. J.P. Sullivan went to go back to as much of the original sources we have. And again, we only have the middle part of the story. The monks saved it, but because of how pornographic it was stored cavalierly, so a lot of moisture from the top and bottom ruined it. But they did save it. And those versions they saved were probably also very watered down, or they may themselves have altered the translations. So one, as I said, this shows the Roman Empire the culture of the Roman Empire as it was at its time, which is very degenerate, obsessed with, as I said, obsessed with sex, obsessed with food, obsessed with the size of houses, obsessed with the transgenderism you see in there, these concepts of taking, say, promiscuity and treating it as a way to personal and intellectual enlightenment, or taking kinks or fetishes as a way to enlightenment. This obsession with having massive houses, and that may have been why Nero was upset. He built this golden mansion that was covered something like 300 acres, which was over the top and frivolous. So we see this culture that is getting jaded, getting cynical. And, in this book are themes of transgenderism. The Roman Empire didn't really have transgenderism in our modern concept. They saw it as sort of a fluidness. Cross-dressers, transvestites would dress up, men dressing as women. And but also in here is pederasty, pedophilia, and trying to intellectualize it to make it something else. And what's sort of amazing about this is that, especially on the parts of promiscuity or fetishes, is that the main characters, they find themselves, if they conduct this behavior, that they are going to find some deep, profound satisfaction with it. But instead, it's always rushed. It's not as satisfying as it is, or it's not as satisfying as promised. So they do what is a natural human impulse: is they have to think, or they think they have to chase more of this particular style of fetish in order to gain more from it, which is a common theme today, right? They push certain hookup culture, and people do it because it's easy indulgence in human nature and your sexual nature. But the more you do it, it kind of feels like you have to keep doing it in order to chase down the satisfaction you promise, and it doesn't quite really ever happen. And this is a great portrayal of that. The other element is this obsession with body parts, right? They put an obsession on genitalia, on people's looks, and also, this farting, burping, this lowering of decorum. And, so it really paints Roman Empire in the grips of this sort of cynicism, of the sort of excess that happens when these kinds of ideas people try to latch onto them for their own pleasure and then repress what's really going on and then use this idea to intellectualize what it is that they are doing. So let me talk about the modern day here. Victor Davis Hanson, one of my favorite historians and also my favorite podcasts, refers a lot to the Satyricon and how it really reflects modern day. And that is a concern, and he's right. Much more of our degeneracy is online. It's very vicarious, but we do see a lot of what's in here. For instance, this obsession with bigger houses, and each room in the house has a particular theme. A few months ago, the Wall Street Journal ran this article about a very wealthy gay throuple trying to renovate their massive home and have each room tailored to their unique and particular tastes. This is frivolous. I was going to go frivolity there, but it's frivolous. It's over the top. All right. The Wall Street Journal is supposed to be the financial newspaper, and it's talking about an ultra high net worth gay throuple, 3 men, trying to get a room or each tailor rooms to their size. It's this over the topness that it's garish, it's frivolous. It's all of these particular things, right? But this is what they're pushing out to us, that we're supposed to be concerning ourselves with maybe the lone gay throuple on Earth that are all ultra high net worth and living somewhere, I forget where it was, Manhattan or Los Angeles, in a 8-figure estate or house trying to renovate each particular room to their taste. And you see that lately in the Wall Street Journal, how in your third home in Park City or Deer Valley, that it's a $10 million home, how to renovate it so in a way that it feels like home away from home. This is ridiculous kinds of things. And it's decadence is what it's showing. And these themes are in the Satyricon, as well as the transgenderism, the taking something like extreme promiscuity and trying to force it through this lens of how you can intellectualize it and become enlightened and find more satisfaction with it, that traditional relationships don't really work. There's a scene in here where one of the characters, and they're almost like a Three Stooges type character, how they kind of bumble through things, but they fancy themselves to be incredibly smart. How he gets in front of a real beautiful woman and she's trying to have sex with him, and he can't perform because his brain, as the kids would say, is porn-brained, completely fried by all of these other elements that he's doing. This pederasty, right? He needs old women to be doing weird things, right? He's gotten to this point where he just has lost his soul, right? He has lost his sense of who he is. It's a fascinating book. It really does show the Roman culture. It's not all of the Roman culture was like that, obviously, but this focuses on probably the Rome and the surrounding areas. But it is one of the most telling books to read of our culture today. There's a ton here. It's pretty enlightening. It's pretty pornographic. So if you do read it, you have to keep that in mind. But remember, Christian monks saved this particular work for a reason, and for a very good reason. All right. Now, the fall of the Roman Empire. So, did degeneracy cause the fall of the Roman Empire? Escape from Rome by Walter Scheidel. This is a heavy book. Let me finish reading that title. Escape from Rome, The Failure of Empire and the Road to Prosperity, Walter Scheidel. This book is all about the fall of the Roman Empire. It's an exhaustive work on how the Roman Empire came to be, why it was miraculous, how it came to be due to its particular structures, and really why it fell. And Scheidel is what makes his book, even though it's heady, what makes it fascinating to read is his counterfactuals. So a counterfactual historian will ask sort of a what if, or will take a common objection. So for instance, Christians made the Roman Empire fall. He covers that. Another one is inflation made the Roman Empire fall. He also covers that. He really goes into the nuts and bolts, the granular features of the structures of the Roman Empire, from politics, economics, foreign policy, and he's able to piece together actual, evidence of how it worked, the financials of how everything worked, and then he's also able to look at the Roman Empire, how it existed and how it grew, and compare it to the Chinese empire, or the Mongolian time during the steppes, and also the geography of the Roman Empire, why the Roman Empire was really almost a miracle, that it was bloated before it began. And like a lot of historians, they kind of peg Augustus as the beginning of the end, because while Augustus was a great leader of the Roman Empire, he forged the entire constitution, the republic, in his image. And without him, it struggled, right? It went to leaders like Caligula or Nero, and then had to be kind of put together again by Marcus Aurelius or Constantine. So it had these particular ebbs and flows that were very difficult to deal with. And Scheidel covers all that. So I read this book a little while ago. It still sticks with me, so I can't quite extract all of the facts, and that's probably good because this video is already getting pretty long. But if you are really interested in how the Roman Empire fell and in the structure of the Roman Empire fell, and you don't want sophomoric ideas like, oh, it's bikinis, or the pagans caused it to fall, this is a really fantastic work. It's super in depth. And again, it is a bit heady, but it is fantastic. It really is, to give a great understanding of what truly made the empire fall, from the nuts and bolts, from the actual evidence, not from theory. Really, really great book. So I would first say, if you want to understand the Roman Empire, reading these 3 books in order, 10 Caesars, Petronius, and Escape from Rome, will really give you a great handle on how the Roman Empire came to be, how it worked, what the culture was like, what made it fall, what made it decline, how it ebbed and flowed, why the Roman Empire is important today, why it stands out, how it was so different than our world today, what lessons we can take from it, how the Roman Empire has still impacted us, right? There are still decisions and actions by emperors today that affect us from the Roman Empire, right? And how it influenced the founders of America, Western democracy, and why it fell, as in Scheidel, to keep going here. The polycentrism that arose in the West after the fall of the Roman Empire in the West was what gave birth to the Western democracy, what gave birth to the West. And Christians had a big hand in that, from science to social cultures to laws. And so, as Scheidel says, it was the biggest gift to humanity was the fall of the Roman Empire. But a truly fantastic book. Okay, but let's say you don't want to read all 3 books on the Roman Empire. You just want to read one book to understand the Roman Empire. You're just passing by, you just want to read one. If I had to recommend one, 10 Caesars by Barry Strauss. If you want to get a great handle on how it came to be, everything I just mentioned, the culture, the social aspects, the political aspects, why the Roman Empire falls, clearing up myths and confusions, some common claims around the Roman Empire, whether they are true or not. This book is marvelous. It's so expansive. It's not that long. It's, what is it here? It's about 320 pages. Yeah, 320 pages. It's immensely readable. You may not walk away remembering every single name or character, but you'd have a great concept of the Roman Empire. And you'll also get a clear answer on why it fell, which is right here on page 318, and I'll read that for you. The Roman Empire in the West fell because of bad leadership, as well as poorly deployed military resources, internal division, strong enemies, unfavorable geography, and a decline of resources. The empire would have other great leaders before the West fell, but most of them would be in the East. In the East, as I mentioned before, the dynamism was in the East. Now, I said I'm going to give a little bit of a bonus book. So let's just say, if you really want to dig into it and get 2 quick, easy, or not easy reads, The War That Made the Roman Empire by Barry Strauss. So if you want an idea of how the Roman Empire was before Augustus existed, this is fantastic. Antony, Cleopatra, Octavian at Actium. You got intrigue, you got affairs, you have battles. It's a really fun book. If you read this one and then 10 Caesars, you'll have a great understanding. So that's just a little bit of a bonus book. As you can tell, I'm a Barry Strauss fan. But again, if you want just one book, 10 Caesars by Barry Strauss. So this was a long video for my first one. If you liked it, I guess I'm supposed to say hit that like and subscribe. If you want to check out more and possibly join my book club, where I discuss with my paid members various books, and we go through books. I do read-alongs. Go to jimclair.com. If you want to just subscribe and read my articles, go to jimclair.com. And I will be back again, but I hope you enjoyed my first video. They're only going to get better from here, but thank you.